Hello and welcome to GETV. We have got a whopper of a guest for you on this week's GETV. The fantastic Elliott Masie is joining us. Elliott, as you know, is one of the rock stars of the learning and development world, having been one of the most industry's prominent thinkers for decades. He heads up the Masie Centre, a think tank focused on supporting learners and knowledge within their workforce. And he also heads up the Learning Consortium, a coalition of 200 global organisations cooperating on the evolution of learning strategies. And if that is not enough, he also runs the annual learning conference in Orlando, which attracts some of the biggest speakers in the world. Elliott, we are hugely excited to have you here on GETV. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Juliet. It's an honor to be here, and hello to everybody who's looking from out there.
So without further ado, let's kick off with the first questions. So which key areas of research are currently exciting you the most at the MASIE Learning Lab?
Well, we're looking really at three different pieces. One of them is, I think, not going to surprise anybody, but it is how video is evolving, is shifting, is changing, how it's getting, in some cases, virtual and in some cases, Pokemon-like. But we are continually looking at what that role of video as a part of the learning and the collaboration process. The second piece that we're looking at, and I think it's an intriguing friend of the first one, is the role of on-the-job training. You know, we've become very obsessed over the years with e-learning. I get credit for having, I guess, helped expand that term. But yet when you talk to 100 employees from any country and you ask them how do they learn to do their job, inevitably they describe on-the-job training, although it's not a phrase they have. But we're looking at what that means and how do we support that. And then the third area that we're, I think, fairly obsessed with is what learning apps may become. You know, we all are used to downloading an app to help us pick a restaurant or to do a function or to support a process. We believe that the beginning of learning apps are coming, where a learner or their organization will suggest or get a very targeted app that helps one person do one thing continuously a bit better. So those are some of the arenas that we're exploring here at the lab.
Fantastic. I feel like I have loads of questions I'd like to dig deeper in, but I need to move on and I need to ask you about gamification. I know it's high on your radar. You've invited our mutual friend Carl Koch to talk about gamification at your learning conference 2015. How well do you think the industry is utilizing gamification right now? And how do you see gamification evolving in the future?
I'm a little schizophrenic, Juliet, on the term, because I'm a gamer. I've been a gamer since I was a little kid. I played chess in the park with 65-year-old retired people, and now I'm 66-year-old, so I guess I was playing with some ancient version of me. I play video games. I am a fan of crossword puzzles, and I really believe that simulation and engagement like that are enormously important. What excites me about gamification is the idea, and our friend Carl Kapp is a big advocate, that you can take a game element and wrap it or weave it or Velcro it to a learning activity without having to build out $1 million game. And I think that's important because at the end of the day, the employees and the stakeholders want them to be doing work related to learning, not necessarily playing. In addition, we know that there are a lot of games that are really interesting for a little while, but they may not be sustainable, you know. So we need to build out a sustainable model. I think the word gamification is a good interior word, you know. In other words, it's kind of like insulation on your house. We'll have a technical term to talk about it. but you don't necessarily want to say, oh, go look at that house with bipolar 78.4 insulation, And so I've not been using that word a lot externally. And I'll tell you one reason why, and Carl and I would not disagree about this, is I'm not sure I want it appearing in a print newspaper story about how employees in an organization that had some failure were trained. I'm not sure I wanted to say Bank X used gamification. I think what gamification does, which is it leverages game elements, competition, engagement, and some degree of getting at that emotional part of us that gets triggered when we're in a good game, is powerful. It's just still at the beginning in terms of it being large and scalable. I think, literally things I mentioned a moment ago, whereas we start to see things like Pokemon Go, and I watch these two people who I know for decades who are not techie, are not gamers, and they were walking around my town, and it was very clear in about 4 seconds what they were doing. I wonder if that may be a little bit of a tipping point to look at how do we build in that competition engagement in a sustainable way without turning our learners into gamers, but tickling the game competitive part of them.
I love that thinking. It's really, really interesting. And, your point about cost, I think, is particularly interesting because, certainly here in the UK, there's a perception that when you turn learning into a game, the costs of that are, very, very difficult, to scale. And so, having a gamification, strategy, can only ever be part of your, overall kind of learning, learning culture. But thank you for that.
And one issue I think, Juliet, that we have to look at is that people who are truly gamers will look at some of the corporate workplace games and go, boy, those are lame. Meaning they're used to operating a $10 million video game. And so, I've always wanted, I thought one of the interesting games would be to take Angry Birds or Angry Pigeons and turn it into an Angry Customers game, where you could deal with, but find ways of getting things that are simpler, graphically less complex, don't require the same kind of cost or load, so that they can be done more agilely. And once again, we're at the beginning. It's truly the infancy of this, and I'm excited about it. I think it's going to add pizzazz to the process of learning and knowledge acquisition.
Yeah, and I think particularly in terms of that engagement piece, some of the customers that we have that have, a much sort of younger audience, particularly with retail and stuff like that, it's a lot easier to get them engaged in something that is either gamified or game-based than traditional learning. So I think, as you say, although we are at the early stage of it, it's quite exciting to see how it's evolving and how learners are much more readily wanting to engage with learning if it's presented in a way that, for them is part of the way they do things naturally in their life.
Right. Yeah. And I think the one thing we have to be a little careful of is leaderboards, for instance, are quite popular now. And the leaderboard is really good if you're on that board, It's not so much fun if you're not on that board. Somebody said to me, oh, they're doing gamification. Yeah, I'm on the bottom board, so it is that interesting element of, are we competing against each other, which is one model. The other model is we're competing against an aspiration, so we're not on a leaderboard about that, Juliet is better or worse than Melissa, but Juliet is getting towards that goal of what Juliet wants to get to. And so I think some of this is design, it's user experience, and it's who is expecting Pokemon Go to blast onto the planet, but maybe it's related to the vote in Britain and the political campaign here in the U.S. We all need a way of escaping a little bit. So there's probably always a context that's out there,
Fantastic. And again, I could talk about this, all afternoon with you, but I need to get your thoughts on question 3, which is all about social learning. Now, I know in the past you dislike the phrase social learning. Can you tell us a little bit about why, and how would you prefer to approach it?
A little bit of credentialing on that. I'm probably one of the earliest facilitators of online forums. I worked at the Well as a facilitator at a place called CompuServe that your younger viewers, hear their parents talking about. And great. Okay. And I'm a big believer that digital technology gives us a way of collaborating socially in a way that's powerful. And there's wonderful decades-long research about that learners need to be social. It's part of their process. We go through a thing called cognitive rehearsal. I learned something and I need to explain it to somebody else. Where I get a little suspicious of the term social learning is the oversimplification that if I give people a social place, A, they'll go, and B, they'll value it, and C, they'll learn. Having been one of the first, CompuServe board coordinators in what was called the SIG, what we found was, intriguingly, the people that came and spent the most time were the angry, the annoyed, and the departing. The highest knowledge people didn't stick around. You look at SharePoint, an incredibly sophisticated product from Microsoft, probably the most abandoned technology in the universe. Now, not because SharePoint is bad. It's like a whiteboard. You can make it interesting or not. But there's been this false assumption that if I'm teaching a group of 8 people something like money laundering detection in a bank, that then if I put them on Jive or Yammer or SharePoint, that something magical is going to happen. And I think that's naive. I think what we need to do is not to think about social learning, where social is the describer. It's the same reason I never use mobile learning. I'm a user of mobile devices that help me do learning. But a lot of times mobile learning was reading a course done in 3-point pink type on a screen that I couldn't read on. Well, social learning does that. So I take a different position. Let's build a way to connect our employees with other people in and outside the organization, with some way of detecting those that have knowledge, expertise, or peers. Let's figure out a way sometimes to create structured ways for people to learn together. So not just sending them to SharePoint, but saying, okay, the 5 of you are in our money laundering program, and you're going to need to work together on a project, and I might go really farther. We're going to give a test to all 5, and nobody passes unless all 5 pass. Now, there is powerful learning using a social process, but it's not defining it as time on Jive. I mean, the worst thing happened. There was one company who said, "We think social learning is everything," and their annual performance review looked at how often they had gone onto a SharePoint site and left a note. Well, you know what happened. About 1 week into the process, somebody wrote a little algorithm that logged them in every day saying, "Good point, ? Smile." And they got a really high SharePoint rating, having never participated. So I'm a big believer that as learning people, we should engage other learners. We should use the technology to do it. But let's not be naive to say if we build it that they'll come, if they'll come that they'll learn, and if they come that they'll stay. So I'm more of a design maniac around that. Use it well, but don't do it theatrically or symbolically.
Very interesting. Yeah. So let's talk briefly about personalized learning. I'm interested in your opinion on the current state of personalization within learning tech, how you see it developing. I know that you've published a book on big learning data. Right. Will we see more of this taking a role?
Oh, hugely. You know, one of my colleagues and collaborative mentors in this is Sir Ken Robinson. And he and I are both convinced that personalization is a phenomenon. Now, here's the most interesting, maybe paradox. Personalization is a phenomena that will work because learners want it, not because our systems purport to do it, which means what's happening now is at home, the learner is involved in the personalization of content. Nobody really watches a lot of live TV anymore. They can do it on demand. I very often will go and watch the last 5 minutes of a sporting event I'm not overly interested in, so I can talk about it at a party that night. On the other hand, I take some on-demand things and I marathon them. I have a friend who's in the TV series Orange Is the New Black, so I watch all 13 episodes in a marathon weekend. I also think we are now at a point where we have not just one, but often dozens of choices for content. We can watch the video, read the PDF, watch listen to the podcast. And so the learner now they're almost overwhelmed by all of that choice. So now the interesting question becomes, how does the learner get, and it's an interesting phrase, how does the learning get to efficiency? Now I'm talking about the learner's efficiency, which means you and I, even though we share a lot of interests, may be very different in how we learn. Somebody may, in fact, want to see a demonstration of it and then the conceptual level. I, on the other hand, want to not touch the manual, open it up, try it, break it, fix it, and learn that way. And by the way, I'm not faster as a learner. That's just my native approach to that. So we believe that learning is going to increasingly become personalized covertly. The learner is doing it. The best example are webinars. We get so excited. An hour-long webinar. By minute 43, people are eating lunch, they're doing email, or they've left.
Yeah.
Not because it's bad, but because they made their own efficiency. I got what I wanted from Elliott in 20 minutes. I didn't need the next 20. And so on the other hand, there's another level of personalization that we are not yet seeing but about to see. I'm doing a lot of work with MIT now in machine learning, where essentially, if you kind of imagine what an online store like Amazon might do, to kind of know what you want, buy, and how you respond, and now give you a unique offer that's about you. There's no LMS that does that yet. Sad. There ought to be, because efficiency in learning is way more important than efficiency in sock purchasing. But I really believe that we're going to start to see a machine learning side of personalization, and we don't know if it's going to live on the corporate computer, or for that matter, if it's going to live on me, the learner's computer, where I go, Elliott, they offered you 20 things. Here's the one video you ought to watch because the people on LinkedIn all like that video as well. But that may not be corporately given. That may be personally given and stuff. So I think we've got about 36 months. We're going to watch this rollout of what machine learning. I think we're going to get used to the phrase recommendations, that machines will start to recommend, not prescribe, but recommend what works for you or me. And bluntly, we'll take a look at what I don't know well and suggest to me either that I learn it better or maybe I avoid doing that. Do not have me do a few functions in Excel. I mean, I'm not good at a few functions. I wish they were like read out in my Excel. So warning, don't press this button. You'll get it wrong, Elliott, So, yeah, but that's where it is hugely exciting. But, my view is we won't design personalization as learning professionals. I'm not putting our field down, but it's a larger phenomena. It's going to be in the content handling phenomena, in the larger world of information, and then we're going to leverage, borrow in, and adapt it to our worlds.
Very interesting. Lots of potential, I think, for functionality in terms of, feature sets on LMS and mobile applications
Hmm.
there. So on to something a little bit more closer to your heart. So one of your key interests is music. In fact, you're also a Broadway producer, having been involved in the production of Kinky Boots, amongst other shows. I've seen that you've previously talked about the power of songs in the workplace, and we've certainly got a
Hmm.
couple of our teammates at Growth Engineering who do like a good sing song. Have you got any thoughts on how songs can be used in learning?
Well, a double whammy here in a way. One, I really believe that we ought to be calling ourselves not instructional designers but learning producers. I love being a producer. And the nice part, and it's an honest thing, as a producer, I don't sing the songs, I don't write them, I'm not necessarily building the costumes. I'm pulling things together for a hopeful or desired experience. So I'm a producer on Kinky Boots. American in Paris is about to come to London, a show that we started in the U.S. And in all of those shows, what we find about music is that there's an emotional biological reaction to it. I mean, just the other day, because I'm doing a theater project at our headquarters, I brought a piano that we happened to have for a different project into a seminar room. Now, it had nothing to do with music there. I just brought it in and I put it on demo. It was one of those keyboard things. It was playing, and then I said, "Hey, by the way, we got 10 minutes before we get started. Anybody play the keyboards?" Well, for the rest of this program, every break, somebody came up and jammed out. The environment in that room, and it was pretty good to begin with, got great because we understood the emotional reaction. Years ago, people who study neurolinguistic programming talked about how we get activated. For me, when I was growing up, I remember learning vocabulary on a little TV show called Schoolhouse Rock. So where I kind of learned, a vowel is this, a consonant is that. So I actually think we haven't embraced the arts the way we could in learning, and that is music. I think it's also acting. I think it's storytelling. We're going to see some brain research coming out probably in about a month that looks at a new map of the brain, and they found this one area of the brain kind of back here that's only stimulated by a story. And I think what we're going to start to find is that our cognitive processes are impacted by the role of things other than lecture. I mean, nowhere do I know anybody who gets chills from watching a PowerPoint slide with 8 bullets. I mean, it's good organization, but it doesn't exactly get our juices going. But how do we get the learning juices of our learners going? And I think it's from stories, and I think music can play a role. And it even goes to memory. We memorize songs that we never sat down to say, "Let me memorize it," but they become part of our brain just because we process that differently. So I'm a learning producer, and I would encourage the people watching. By the way, you get promoted better if you're a producer. Instructional designers get kept where they are. Producers, they go up in the world. So.
I love that thinking. I mean, I think it's really, with that kind of thinking, you really can change things. It's just immense power to get that creativity in the room, or online, or wherever it is. Yeah, great thoughts, and thank you so much. So question number 6: as an industry, are we actually turning the tide on the war of engagement with learners? I know, before you said, I'm enormously intrigued to see what we can do to get the managers of learners more actively engaged. What's your thoughts on where we are in the process, and what would you like to see?
I'm confused about it. I don't know. My good colleague Marshall Goldsmith, who's written widely about coaching and engagement, he would argue with me that he's confused because engagement works when it works for the people it works with. We sometimes confuse engagement as what we invite people to do when real engagement is what then they choose to do with each other. What I do think we're shifting, and I think technology is helping us, is to break down the barriers for collaboration, to break down the barriers for being able to find out, is there anyone out there who's had that same problem? This is the social dimension without that phrase social learning to it. And I do think there is this opportunity for engagement to be woven into our curriculum. Now, here's our dilemma. Most of our designers are not engagement rich. They are publishers by heart. And so good instructional design. I had a great experience. I was in India visiting a programmer that was working for us for his wedding, and I went to a group of e-learning developers in Mumbai, and they were excited to get together with me. And at the beginning, I had everybody introduce themselves, and going around the room, it was, hi, my name is X, and by the way, I have a BA in English and an MA in music, and we went all the way around. And I went to him, I said, I'm confused because more e-learning is often developed in India than any other place in the world as a partnering or outsourcing. You all have this music and theater background. What happened to the Bollywood that ought to be in learning? And they laughed. I said, look, I love Bollywood. I wish that you had people on top of trains like dancing, But it was interesting because what they ended up saying was their client, or probably more likely their manager, wanted to make e-learning efficient and dry. And I would argue that if we wanted to stick, we want to get that higher level of engagement going. But we as a field are much better at laying out content than building engagement strategies. And I hope it's changing. And I think some of it, once again, is that we need to bring new people into the process who have a background in theater, in coaching, in collaboration. I would even argue feedback. I went to give a lecture about a year ago to a group of about age 25-year-olds who are about to be promoted. And I asked them, give me a piece of advice you'd love to give to the older generation that you don't have the courage to give. And they said, cut the crap on feedback. Tell me where I'm screwing up. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you guys are all psychobabble, like, oh, you're doing a good job. And so we want to say your writing stinks, that layout sucks. Like, in other words, tell it to us directly so we can then actually we can make it better. So I actually think we might find some of this engagement by bringing people in who have a different framework,
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. And fascinating insight on your experiences in India as well. Really very, very interesting, the sort of polarization on that. Elliott, you've been analysing the world of learning and development for a long time. In fact, you're acknowledged as the first analyst to even use the term e-learning. What kind of innovations do you think we can expect to see? I know it's a big question, but in the near future, a million miles out.
Well, I knew you would ask me the questions. I have really two. One, I think we're going to look at our phones. And then once again, I think Pokemon Go is one element. And we're going to move away from just viewing them as small portable devices. I find that by doing audio-based searching, things change. Imagine being able to put this on and say, I've just been hired, and I've been told by my manager that it's really important for us to not say no to customers, that we try to, well, what if we put it on, we could say, monitor me. And all day long, which, by the way, your phone is a capture device. And at the end of the day, it said, Jessica, you said no 14 times. In fact, you said no 8 times to one customer. Now, we've never gotten that kind of micro feedback. And some people may feel it's intrusive. But imagine what it would look like if I could put a little mini bud in my ear. And while doing something the first 2 days on the job, somebody could coach me in my ear. You're doing that performance review. Stop saying thank you. Or, Ask X. So I think we're going to leverage the phone dynamically, the locational areas, the capture areas. The other piece I'm intrigued with, we're looking at high expensive VR virtual reality. Facebook spent $3 billion for Oculus, but here's a $45 device from Leap Motion, which you just put your hands like this and you manipulate an object on the screen. Now, I would argue in about 6 months, I can do it with this. Well, what that would suggest is a tactile, or haptic, as some people would say, a tactile way of playing with data more. I mean, I'd love to be able, I sit on some boards of directors of companies, I'd love to be able to get the spreadsheet from them and then take my hands in and get at the data, in a 3D tactile format. So I think that's coming. And then I think there's one other level which we've got to be comfortable with, which is we're not good at everything, I mean, I would love to be a good basketball player, but on the scale, I'm a 1.1 on 100 scale basketball, and I know it. Doesn't mean I don't play basketball, but I know it. I don't think we're always comfortable admitting and even knowing ourselves what we're good at, what we're not good at. I know the things I'm not good at. Luckily, I'm CEO, so I tell staff to prevent me, protect me, or correct me. But how do we look at skills not as a grade from 0 to 100, and if you're missing something, it means you're an 80? Rather, it's what you are. People who are single, who are dating, aren't looking for everybody to have they on a dating profile, they say, I'm good at this, I'm not good, I like this, I don't like that. We haven't embraced that at work, that not everybody wants to be, or will ever be great at everything. But we're a community of workers in an office, and we put up with or leverage each other's stuff. So I wish we got more granular and comfortable in talking about that feedback.
Mm. And it's interesting as well because, if I think about some of our experience with corporate learning as well, they tend to focus on the things that are more in and around compliance rather than expertise. So, for example, innovation is a critical part of the health of any, company. It's about their future, but we don't see many innovation programs, but we see a lot of financial compliance programs. I think that's another, interesting, point as well. We can't be good at everything, but we should be broadening our scope in terms of what we're trying to get people to, build good skills in.
Right. And I guess, in a way of wrapping up that conversation, you can, we're going to have to be, and I think at the end of the day, we are engineers, because I think, learning people are engineers. We are teachers. We enjoy that passion of teaching, of all of that involves lecturing being the least interesting part of it, to assessment and coaching. And then I think finally we are performance folks, meaning that at the end of the day, while it's nice that Joe learned that, it's really important that Joe makes more sales. So we've got to understand that the net measure of that is not that Joe liked the course or even that he scored well at the end of the course, but that sales went up, and learning is an intervention to drive performance. So I think it is that combination of that. And that's why our field is so interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could talk about that all day. On to my final question. Learning 2016 conference is just around the corner, and you have announced some really incredible guest speakers. Really excited to learn a little bit more. What can we expect?
Well, we did TED Talks before TED was doing TED Talks, and we work closely with the folks from TED. So it's my 26th year of doing a conference. It's focusing on learning in disruptive times. These are disruptive times, world events, and on every level. So our keynoters are just interesting folks. We have astronaut Scott Kelly, who spent a year in space and came back down, and we're going to talk about learning in space and what did he learn there and what was that process. To go back in history, 50 years ago was the first episode of Star Trek. And so we have another astronaut who doesn't fly in space, but is one of the highest frequency social media people, and that is my friend and colleague George Takei, who was Sulu in Star Trek. We have a wonderful filmmaker, Tiffany Shlain, who has done a great film on character as a science and looking at character and literally hers is one of the most widely viewed videos on the web, and she's going to talk to us about character and what that means. Just the other day we announced Anderson Cooper from CNN is coming, and literally we're going to be 2 weeks before the U.S. election, and he's not a political person, but I'm going to interview him for an hour about what the role of breaking news is and how we're handling that, and what he's seeing even around heroes. And then Melissa Daimler, who's the Chief Learning Officer for Twitter. And Twitter's doing interesting things. They're blowing up performance reviews. They're saying, that's not really going to work here. So she's going to talk about what learning is in high tech. And just yesterday, by the time this comes out, I can announce it, but Sanjay, who is the head of learning design for MIT, is going to be there talking about brain science. And we're going to talk a little bit about why PowerPoints don't work. What is it that we know about knowledge and the like, and then many other just really exciting things. And we have a big VR Learn lab there where people will get a chance to play with current and future virtual learning, way beyond Pokemon Go. But how do we? I'd love for somebody to be able to simulate an employment interview before going on it, and maybe at the end of it decide they're not going to go on it and do something more appropriate. So it's all there, October 23 to 26th in Orlando, Florida, and I'm excited. I'm also going to be over in London in September, and I'm excited to be chatting with a lot of learning leaders then too. So it'll be an exciting year ahead.
It certainly does. It sounds absolutely fantastic. Well, Elliott, the time has come to wrap this interview up. It really has been a really inspiring interview. I feel like I've learned a lot, and it's just so much to think about and ponder on. So, thank you very much. Just to sort of, a lot of people watching this will already be following you on social media, but for those who don't, where can people find out a little bit more about you? We'll also put that on the screen as well.
Go up to www.masie.com, and I am a pretty active Twitter follower with 10,000 followers and some great conversations going on, and it's at eMasie, EMASIE. So either way, or just Google me, and you'll find mainly things that are true there. There are some other things that aren't, but it's okay. That's part of the world of social media. But thank you very much, and I appreciate it, Juliet, and I appreciate chatting with all of your colleagues on this TV program.
Thank you so much, Elliott. All the information's on screen. It only remains for me to say thank you again and goodbye, and hopefully we can speak soon. Take care.
Take care.